The first story this week is a facepalm moment, and then the rest of them are just about people leaving religion. So that's awesome. But let's get going with the facepalm moment. And I'm picking up here the Vatican's reaction to the fantastic news that marriage equality is now coming to Ireland. So congratulations, Ireland, and everybody in Ireland. I always prefer the term working toward marriage equality, because for me that's what it is. It's not about going out and getting special rights for gay people to get married. It's about expanding the existing civil rights and recognizing that we're discriminating against them. And so that's when I talk about it, I tend to use the term marriage equality, just a little bit of note as to why. And with this vote on marriage equality in Ireland, the church, the Catholic Church in particular, was very, some people in the Vatican were very upset. And one of their spokespeople was quoted as saying the following. According to the Associated Press, Cardinal Parolin, Vatican Secretary of State, stated that he was personally saddened by the decision and was quoted as saying, "I don't think you can speak only about a defeat for Christian principles, but a defeat for humanity," Parolin said, and added that the Church had to acknowledge the reality, but in the sense of reinforcing its commitment to evangelization. Right, so a little bit about the marriage equality vote in Ireland. The referendum itself was carried with 62% of the vote, so that's landslide. It's like, yeah, almost 2/3, which is phenomenal and just makes me really happy. Apparently only one out of the nation's 43 parliamentary constituencies voted no. All of them, the rest voted yes. And that one, the yes vote got almost 49% of the vote. So it was almost completely across the board unanimous. And we have seen these fights being brought up in Ireland before. Recently, it voted to expand divorce rights, and it has also, the Catholic Church has had a real stranglehold on the government in terms of access to abortion. So what we're seeing here, I think, is a very organic and exciting movement where people are identifying the difference and the need to distinguish between private beliefs and how a government is run. And this is what I see. It's not so much about a gay rights agenda or anything like that. It's about a secularization agenda. And that secularization agenda has to do with what I do in my private life is none of your freaking business. Who I love is none of the government's business. Where I want to have a civil union, go and have a state-recognized marriage along with everybody else, is none of any religion's business. And so I think the Catholic Church has been now caught off guard twice, once with the divorce vote and now again with this marriage equality vote. And they're not quite understanding what's happening. They're thinking that if they just go out and preach from the pulpit, that it's going to scare people into trying to force the religious views of a minority onto an entire population. And I think that these men caught up in their bubbles don't have a good grasp of what's actually going on. But that's okay, because we do, and that means as the people who promote secularization and secularism are going to win. Now, apparently the Secretary General of some Catholic organization, Bishop Galantino, called for a dialogue on the issue of marriage equality and the future of the Church, saying, quote, "The margin of the yes victory in Ireland obliges us all to take on board that Europe, and not just Europe, is undergoing an accelerated process of secularization which touches on everything, including relationships." He goes on to say, "Faced with this reality, our response can be neither a stubborn refusal based on fear and arrogance, nor an uncritical acceptance based on fatalism and retreat." So this is what I was saying about them not getting it. The Church hasn't yet come up with a good way to explain why people's religious beliefs should interfere with people's secular rights. And until they can actually come up with something that doesn't sound like pure hypocrisy or Bible-based bigotry, marriage equality is going to continue to go forward. The other stories that I want to focus on for this week build on the Pew study that I mentioned a week ago and was expanding into, I think it was a week ago, my timeline is all screwed up. But the rest of this video, I want to look at other articles that are covering similar stories. The first one, and I'm doing it first because it's dearest to my heart, is a focus on why young women are leaving the church. And as you guys know, I hate religious patriarchy. I want to destroy it and smash it apart and free every man and women from these primitive sex roles that the Bible writes us in that no longer fit 6,000 years later. And so to see the increase in the number of women identifying as agnostics and humanists and atheists, I find very exciting, and it inspires me to keep doing these kinds of videos and this kind of work. So let's dive into the numbers and see what's going on. Now, again, we talked about Ireland vote and Catholic vote and worldwide secularization. The rest of this is going to come from US data, but I think it's important to look at these trends because it's happening in a bigger scale in the US because we lag behind Europe in terms of our secularization in the US. And so I think these trends, although perhaps not as media sexy in Europe or in Australia, parts of Canada perhaps, we should be still looking at these structural influences like access to the internet, like women entering into education and being able to access more things that allow them alternative worldview to religion. So again, this is America focused, but I think the causal structures that these researchers are looking at are not limited to the United States. The work that I'm going to cite, the articles are based on a PLOS article that I'll put up on the screen so you can have a look at it. And I know Jean Twenge, not personally, but from my research, my doctoral research work on things looking into sex and gender and political attitudes, I know her work from that. So this work is looking at a large nationally representative survey of American adolescents. And her emphasis in particular is on millennials. The article that I'm going to be going over is from the Washington Post, written by Daniela Paquette, and it's entitled "Why More Women Than Ever Are Skipping Church." One of the things that the news article reports is the fact that Americans are becoming less religious, but picks up on the fact that is disproportionately younger women who are driving this increase of non-affiliated religious identifiers. What Twenge is doing is using these 11 million responses gathered between 1967 and 2013 to isolate religious differences between baby boomers, Generation Xers, and millennials. And what you're seeing is a general decline in what we would call religiosity or religious beliefs and activity. So young people today are less likely to pray or attend religious services, and they're more likely to value individualism and to ditch, as they call it in the article, societal expectations. In 1976, about 10% of teens, high school seniors, said they had never attended a religious service. And in 2010, that number was up to 21%, so basically doubling within that one generation. We saw last week in the Pew study that millennials are more likely than any previous generation to say that they are unaffiliated with religion. Here's a pretty chart that I'll put up for you, which looks at the generational patterns in the identification or non-identification with a religious denomination. And as you can see up here, if we look at the silent generation, those born between 1928 and 1945, only 10% of those respondents identify as religiously unaffiliated. We see a small increase with baby boomers going from 11 to 17%. Then you see another shift of an increase of a further 6 points when you go from baby boomers to Generation X. That would be my generation. But when you look after that to older millennials and younger millennials, you'll see basically more than a 10-point increase. So you see from 11 to 17, that's a 6-point increase. 17 to 23, another 6-point increase. But then you basically see a 10-point increase, and even more than a 10-point increase with younger millennials. And this is coming at the expense of, I think, pretty much everybody, but I, for one, like these trend lines. According to the data, it looks like one of the biggest reasons for that plus 10-point increase between Generation X and millennials is that now the gender gap between girls and boys and women and men who say that they are religiously identified is narrowing. Let me just explain how this works. In the last 4 decades, the increase among male students who reported having never attended church increased at 83% from over the last 4 decades. But at the same period of time, the number of 12th grade girls who reported having never attended church surged 125%. So we're seeing that because men were more likely to identify as atheists, there was room for women to basically fill up that space and help shift that whole trend line up from 6 points to 10, 11, 12, 13 points. To further illuminate this sex gap between men and women's religiosity, in the late 1970s, 12th grade boys were 50% more likely than girls to say that they never go to church. But by 2010, that difference had dwindled to 22%. So we're just seeing basically women catching up with men on all of these different measures. Why is this happening? Why are women catching up? That I can't tell you from her numbers. So the Twenge study, as much as I like it, can't really tell us. It can tell us about age and the comparison across age, and we can even look for control variables like education and whether or not their parents were religious or which religion they belonged to or their parents belonged to. But in terms of actually understanding the psychology of why women are leaving religion or less likely, or why girls are not attending church as much as they used to, this is something that the studies can't tell us. But the article about women leaving does touch on the problems that women encounter in terms of the patriarchal society of religion, or the patriarchal structure of religion, which men are at the top, and the very narrow sex roles for men and women. So men are told to be basically dictators in the home, that they have power, that they should use their power to control women and children in their care, and that women should be submissive, that their primary focus should be on making babies and making their men happy, and that these norms and goals are really becoming increasingly disconnected from women's lived experiences, where they have responsibility in the workplace, where they co-parent with their husband. They don't raise their kids and then the dad helps. They co-parent. That dads want to stay at home and be stay-at-home fathers. That women have financial independence and want to have a say in the kinds of financial decisions that are happening in the family because they're bringing the money to the table as opposed to being submissive and just handing everything over. So the roles that it gives to men and women are highly unsatisfying in our modern society. Is that a possible reason that women are being alienated from religion, and in particular, like in my experience with the Catholic Church? Maybe. It's a possibility, but we can't make those inferences just based on these numbers. In terms of what this means for us as an atheist community, in particular, I think the promotion of secular values, especially in government and how government treats its citizens, I would say that even though these studies are confined to the US, the structures that women are experiencing are not that different in other developed nations. So this trend might be happening perhaps in a slightly less perceptible level in parts of Western Europe, in Canada, in Australia, but because the level of secularization doesn't have that big gap that it had in the US, it's a little harder to see. So I would imagine that if these causal factors in terms of access to education, access to the internet, access to economic independence, to social independence, to political independence, that these factors are happening for a lot of women across the world. And for those women, it might be the case that they're trending away from religion just within the margin of error. It's a trend line that you'd see more over time rather than, like maybe within a 10-year period that would be as clear. So I think that we want to definitely encourage women to embrace secular values because they are based on humanity, equality, and rights rather than on power and submission. I think that's more attractive to modern men and women. This isn't like only women want this stuff. I think men too want equality, and I think that there are a lot of men out there who really want a partner. And not just sort of like somebody to clean their house, but someone to share their life with. And it's kind of hard to do that with somebody that you have power over. So I think that increasingly, like I said, those Bronze Age sex norms or sex roles are unsatisfying. And the more that we can point this out and decouple morality from religious values, the more that we can emphasize the way that secular humanism starts with equality of humans and not with the hierarchy of humans, the more that we have women atheists speaking out about why it's important to liberate women from religious patriarchy, the more we have friendly communities that encourage women to come in and participate and to question and to debate and to get involved in our causes, I think all of that is going to be better for our movement. And so I think the best thing about atheists is that we tend to be kind of nerdy and we like this stuff, we like the stats, and so we can use this information to try to refine our own activities to make our community, to make our content more focused on the things that women are caring about, as well as the things that men are caring about, and the things that just people care about, regardless of their sex or gender or sexual orientation. So the more that we have an inclusive message, I think the better off we are. Following on from this focus on women leaving religion, there was a nice piece in Raw's story about how teens are fleeing religion like never before. And this is also building on the Twenge study, but looking at it more from the lens of adolescents rather than from girls and women. One of the very exciting findings was that some 75% of American 12th graders believe that religion is not at all important to their lives. Woo! So Twenge cites a surge of individualism as the force behind atheism's relative appeal to young, and she calls it self-centric generation. I say individualism is certainly part of it, but for me, obviously, I see this as a trend towards secularization, which is a difference of the religious being a private matter or using the power of the state to enforce one group's religious beliefs. And I think that's the real tension. I know that Twenge wants to put this into sort of a self-centric, selfie generation, but I think she's missing an overall structural shift in terms of values between religious values and secular values that is becoming more and more apparent. And the marriage equality debate really makes it easy to see the difference between a secular approach to government, which is based on equality, and a religious approach to using the power of the state, which is to enforce religious bigotry. Let me just quote here from Twenge, and this kind of summarizes, I think, the difference between our views. One context is rising individualism in US culture. Individualism puts the self first, which doesn't always fit well with the commitment to the institution and other people that religion often requires. As Americans become more individualistic, it makes sense that fewer would commit to religion. The problem with this is that Americans are already highly individualistic. It's probably one of the most atomistic, individualistic societies in the world, and that's something that it's actually culturally a point of pride, is to be completely independent. I think the difference here is where the intrusion of government into your life, almost a more libertarian approach of what are the appropriate rules for religion in terms of governing people's lives and what isn't. And I don't think it's about individualism or not individualism. I actually think it's about a sort of more of a libertarian versus using your religion to take over and promote your religious beliefs through the government. So I guess I'm going to have to maybe look into this a little bit more with my own deconversion research and maybe unpack and perhaps contest some of these conclusions. A social structure that is being pointed to in the study is the role of evangelicals. Again, this has to do with secularization, trying to push themselves into the classroom. So the debates around creationism and intelligent design could be driving some younger people away from religion, especially like when that debate was quite important in the early parts of the 2000s. This article ended with mentioning another study done by Alan Downing, and this was published in MIT Technology Review. And Downey's conclusion was that unprecedented access to the information, like the internet, might be important in determining a person's inclination to embrace religion. I don't know if that's how he phrased it, but if that's how he phrased it, that's problematic. If you want me to explain, just wait a second, I will. So the internet, Downey argues, could be as significant a variable as childhood religious upbringing in influencing an individual's spiritual outcomes. All right, so let me go back and explain why that last sentence is a little bit problematic. The internet might be a major factor in determining a person's inclination to embrace religion. That's giving a whole lot of causal weight to access to the internet. And I don't think access to the internet is enough. You can have access to the internet and never go to an apologetics website or any kind of YouTube video. Just the existence of the internet isn't enough. You have to connect an interest with the topic and the internet. And from my own deconversion research, I can tell you that people who start to question religion find the internet an absolute treasure trove of information that allows them to escape the mental prison that they have been indoctrinated into in their childhood. But they have to have the interest and the will and make the effort to do so. So I think, again, I don't want to attribute this claim to Downey because I often don't trust the way reporters paraphrase scientific findings, but what I would say is that the internet is perhaps a necessary but not sufficient condition to increase the amount of secular free thinkers, humanists, and atheists in a given society. necessary, but not sufficient in terms of the kind of growth that we're seeing in the US and perhaps hopefully in other parts of the world when other parts of the world start doing more in-depth studies. Now, on some of these issues of measuring atheism and quantifying the non-religiously affiliated, I am really excited to see this kind of research being done. I think it's opening a doorway on topics that really do need to be addressed. And I had a chat with Steve Shives on the topic of researching new atheism. So I'll put a card, whatever corner it's supposed to go in, I never remember, and you can have a look on that. One of the things that we talk about near the end of that chat is using social science to understand the increases in atheist identifiers better, to feed back to the atheist movement as to why people are moving away from religion and what we can do to help them, what we can do to understand the causes and conditions, what points in life are people most likely to question religion, all these kinds of things. So I think that for us, the geeky kinds who really like this kind of stuff, not only is this research exciting, but we also embrace it, and I hope that we can take it forward and use it to free more minds as we move forward. Another article published as a result of the Pew study comes from Psychology Today, and it's entitled "Why Are Christian Numbers Dropping?" written by Dave Noyce. I think that's how you pronounce his name. David, if I got it wrong, I'm really sorry. He asked the question, isn't it maybe the case that people are leaving Christianity simply because they don't really believe it anymore? This article points to the role of increasing sort of scientific explanations for the world as a reason why people might be leaving Christianity. He mentions that the Pew results are very close to another Harris survey done in 2013, which showed that a lot of the most core Christian beliefs are on the decline. He cites here from 2007 and 2013, belief in miracles decreased from 79 to 72% amongst Americans, and belief in the resurrection of Jesus dropped from 70% to 65%. And there are other similar drops for beliefs in heaven, the divinity of Jesus, and other Christian concepts. His basic notion here is that as we move farther and farther into the 21st century, the technology-based, communications-based, scientifically expanding world in terms of access to information, results, and findings, that these are pushing against the primitive beliefs about the earth and God and human beings and their role in the universe that is at the foundation of most religions. And that basically these, I think how he describes it, it is the strength of modernity that best explains the growth of the nuns and decline in Christian numbers. That's an interesting take. I don't think he's proved it in this article because you would actually need to run a regression model in order to demonstrate that the coefficients were statistically significant, and also there are issues here about multicollinearity across these beliefs and perhaps a religiosity index within a larger model of declining religious participation would be a better way of capturing that variance. But it is, I think, part and parcel, and it is part of the discussion that we're having in terms of why we're seeing numbers going down, and hopefully, again, informing larger trends, not just in the US, but around the world. Now, the last one I'm going to mention, and then we're going to be done. Does this feel like we've done a lecture on, sort of like social science research and atheism this week? That's kind of like me living out my old teaching days, and I did methods teaching. But the last one I want to focus on is a Salon article that actually came out a couple weeks ago, and I meant to put in last week's episode, but it was running long. And since the theme carried over, I just thought I would bring it along. It's written by Patricia Miller, and it's called "The Catholic Church's American Downfall: Why Its Demographic Crisis is Great News for the Country." I won't go over a lot in this article, but I do want to pick up on one thing. I think I might have mentioned it the last week, but I want to narrow in on it here because I think it connects us back to the first story, which is about Ireland and the Vatican's response to the expansion of marriage equality in Ireland, and that is the number of Catholics who are making up the nuns. The new poll found, and I'm quoting from the article, that the majority of Catholics leaving the church either become nuns, which means they either identify as atheist, agnostics, or say they have no religious affiliation, who are liberal leaning on social issues, or join liberal Protestant denominations. Former Catholics are 2.5 times more likely to become unaffiliated or a liberal Protestant than an evangelical. Right, let me repeat that because that's actually a very big amount in terms of probability. Right? Former Catholics are 2.5 times more likely to become unaffiliated or a liberal Protestant than an evangelical, which is presumably where Catholics would go if they thought the Catholic Church wasn't conservative enough. Catholic defectors is the single greatest factor driving the much heralded rise of the nuns, who now account for just under 23% of the population. Almost 1/3 of nuns are former Catholics, the single largest share of any religion. This, I think, is very fascinating and also should give people who watch this stuff a little bit of a warning that these numbers will probably level off at some point unless we start to see great hemorrhaging from other denominations. So I think this is very fascinating to me because I'm a recovering Catholic and I definitely moved away and went from liberal into Buddhism into atheism eventually. So I'm part of these people that they're talking about. But there's only so much of us to go around. You know, you can't have all the Catholics leave the Catholic Church. So I think what we're seeing now in terms of this religious movement in the US, it does seem to be driven a lot by Catholics leaving and becoming unaffiliated. But if we want these numbers to continue, we can't just keep relying on the Catholic Church to keep screwing up. I think we need to look at other denominations and why people are leaving those denominations or when they leave those denominations and really get a better sense of how people are going from theism into atheism. So is that a great way to start your weekend or what? Wow, so much good news and all kinds of nerdy things that you learned this week and some things that maybe you didn't understand. I made references to multicollinearity. You're not sure what that is. You can drop me a question in the D box below if you have any questions on that kind of stuff or you want to make some comments, or if you want to show me a link to another article that you think would be a good one for next week's Facepalm Moments of the Week. So before I go, I just want to say thank you guys for watching all the way to the end of the video. Please like the video, please share the video, and please subscribe and promote it. Get your friends subscribing. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by my 1-year anniversary in September. I'm creeping up on 800. And once I hit 800, I'll do some kind of bonus video. So there's a little incentive for you guys to put it out on Twitter, throw it out on Facebook. I don't know if anybody does Reddit. I don't often ask you guys to do much for me, so I guess this week I'm asking you to do a little bit to show me some love. It really gives me some enthusiasm. Anything with round numbers, 800, 900, 1,000, always gets me kind of like, woo, milestone. And so if you enjoy the content and want to keep me up and excited, then that's the way to do it, is to share my stuff, like it, make a comment below, tell me what you think, give me some suggestions for other things, because you guys know I often make an effort to get back to your comments and at least do 1 reply or 2 replies back. So I want to open up that doorway with you. So until next week, another Facepalm Moments. I don't know, I can't guarantee it's going to be this happy and exciting, but I will try. I've been Christy, you've been awesome, and I'll see you later. Bye.